Okay, I'm going to kick this off. So I first want to talk a little bit about the work that my group previously did in 2021. And again, the topic here is my actual dissertation topic for my doctorate degree. That's, again, this work led me to my doctorate, teaching truths to the standards. Our project primarily focused on what is left out of the textbooks, the stories of African Americans, both enslaved and free, who lived during this period of our founding fathers. The words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness did not apply. Yet we believe fervently in the American creed. Students in this project researched the lives of African Americans living in colonies during the American Revolutionary period. Next slide, please. So I know you can't see the words on this, but these are the worksheets that was part of the curriculum that still is part of the curriculum in our district. This is the work that the students have to complete to successfully be assessed. This is an assessment in a unit. So I call this the travesties that made me do more. I'm going to read some of the questions out, and then I'm going to speak about some of the responses I would get through the years. This is 5th grade work. I initially started in elementary. I am now a middle school teacher, and I did see a question in the chat, concerning how do I integrate that into math? Well, at that time I was social studies, and I will talk later about the math question. So we have a question and answer going on later. Some of the questions are these cabins located in the city or on a plantation? How did life on a plantation compare to the life in the city? And what do you know about the lives of enslaved people? Many of my students through the years answered these questions like, if you worked in the city, you got better paying jobs of enslaved persons, and that it was better to work inside the house than on the plantation because the sun was hot. These are things that students know. It is not taught in details. So again, I talk about the travesties. Next slide, please. So I created a curriculum that was straight from the Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Center curriculum. But it was like a cut and paste where students could do research and fill out the pictures that are on this sheet. However, the students would have to they would learn to maneuver, through research, maneuver how to cut and paste. Again, this was 5th grade students, and you had to complete this entire document. It was 1 through 10, even though I could not take a picture of all of it. You could use newspaper articles, artifacts, and I gave them like 23 artifacts that was provided in the resources. It still is online under our curriculum for the Motor City educators. And it was a very successful thing because it gave students the opportunity to one, not only navigate and learn technology, but also gave 5th graders the opportunity to kind of see what were we talking about, what is being talked about or not talked about in the curriculum. This was a very successful initiative through our district, and it was not just the Motor City meant surrounding school districts as well, and it is still being used. I have upgraded it because I'm now in middle school, where my principal has given me the grace, not only as a math curriculum coach, that I do get to coach 7th grade in social studies. So I do similar things like this. Next slide, please. And then I always, as every lesson plan should connect to the actual Common Core standards. This is also provided in the resources on the Pulitzer Center site for elementary. And I just included in here to let you know that this is directly related to the Common Core standards. And next slide. And finally, I have a reflection with my students each and every day. These reflections help me deepen my resolve to advocate for equitable support within my school district. I aim to counter the effects of privilege with culturally responsive, supportive educational practices. So you can kind of look at the things that I use to affirm myself, my teaching, and to inspire my students for knowledge and power of teaching, not only to the standard, teaching the standard. I thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. I am again Theresa, and my hour, I should say, because I do want to draw your attention to the wonderful people that appear at the bottom of the images who were my co-creators of our unit. Some of them there are science teachers. We had our science supervisor, as well as our social studies supervisor, and other social studies teachers. Our unit is designed for middle school and for high school because one of our teachers was a middle school seventh and eighth grade teacher. Of course, it would have to be differentiated to really meet the needs of a middle schooler. As a high school, one of the courses that we have is an allied health course. And it was decided by myself and the science supervisor that what would be necessary and needed in our school was a collaboration so that our students could see that what they're learning in social studies applies to what's happening in science. So the origin of our unit actually began while we were in virtual learning because of COVID. And initially, the science supervisor, Dr. David Mwangi, and I did a workshop for teachers to introduce them to the concept. And when we had the opportunity to apply to be part of the 2022 cohort, this was wonderful because we knew our title, Teaching to Transgress, comes from the idea that we have as educators, and we know as our pedagogy is that we're more than content deliverers. So we really wanted to do something that would really empower our students. So the focus for our unit has to do with race, medicine, and health equity. And we know that during the pandemic, it was blatantly apparent to many people that there was an inequity in terms of treatment for people during experiencing COVID. So together, we came up with a unit. Next slide, please. So when we're devising the unit, creating the unit, we always begin by thinking about the outcome. And we knew that we wanted to have a performance project-based learning outcome for our students. And so when we began the unit, we began looking at the essential questions. How do racist ideas from slavery continue to impact the healthcare of not just Black, but also all people of color? How has medicine and science been used to justify slavery and the racial hierarchy? This is where teaching the truth, teaching the true history of what was experienced or perpetrated upon people of color. And we also wanted to look into, does scientific racism still influence how doctors treat Black patients? And what does the pervasiveness of discrimination mean for health? We utilized in our unit the 1619 project, the New Origin Story, but we also had looked at books written by Dorothy Roberts, Killing the Black Body, for one, and then Linda Villarosa's Under the Skin, as well as the articles that were part of the 1619 project. So we hope that armed with all of this background, our students would be able to then come up with proposals to address the inequity that still exists in healthcare. The next slide, please. So, as stated earlier, everything always begins with the standards. The standards help us to look at and keep a focus on how we want this unit to progress. So there is definitely an emphasis that we put on research, an emphasis placed on writing and reading informational texts. So we combined the ELA, the social studies, and the science standards in order to make this a truly interdisciplinary unit. And on top, I do want to call your attention to the two images. Our culminating activity for this unit is we actually held at our school a health fair in which we were able to bring in healthcare professionals to speak with our students. They were able to present their projects, their proposals for how to address the inequities that exist. And it was really a very rewarding experience for everyone because it brought together not just students, but we brought in parents, we brought in our community members as well. And the next slide, please. So here on this slide, there are some examples of some of the student projects that we had completed. Our units in our topics within the units begin with looking at iatrophobia, and this is the fear of medical care, medical practices. And we know that this is not just coming out of thin air, that this is directly related to practices by doctors in the beginning of our nation's history, like J. Marion Sims, the gynecologist. We know about the Tuskegee experiments. We know about the forced sterilization of women, Black, brown, indigenous women. So our students research that history. We look at the impact of colorism and how that is connected to previous biases and discriminations. We definitely wanted to address the healthcare needs of our community. We know that COVID just exacerbated many of the issues that are faced by marginalized population. And so our students took a look at that. And we are still dealing with a Black maternal health crisis, a disparity in the death rates of women of color. And we also looked at the lasting impact of COVID and the pandemic on our communities. And included on the slide are some of the examples of some of the things that our students did. Some of them included spoken word messages. Some of it included exhibits, as you may have noticed in the past slide that we had. So we were very pleased with the outcome. The reflection that the students wrote really showed us that they understood the assignment. They were motivated to address these needs. They saw for themselves within their own family experiences how healthcare equity is impacting our community and many communities across our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So my role as the Associate Superintendent of Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Initiatives, it empowered me to look at classroom practice and school building practice on a much larger scale in a large urban district. So we had the opportunity to implement 1619 project in 60 school buildings serving 30,000 students. So we were very purposeful in how we did that. We looked at what we were already in the throes of creating what we call the emancipation curriculum in 2019 school year, 2019-2020. So this was very timely coming out from Nicole Hannah-Jones in the New York Times, the magazine. It was a nice fit into what we were already considering for district-wide implementation of the emancipation curriculum. And so the whole purpose for infusing the project was that we wanted to ensure in a district that was serving 87% children of color with a 80% white teaching staff, that we wanted to create opportunities for liberating pedagogical practices where the history of Black people could be taught, and from a platform of historical accuracy and inclusion. And we wanted to ensure that we were uplifting marginalized voices for all of our children, but particularly our Black, Brown, and Indigenous children whose voices are often silenced in the classroom. And so we began to think about how we empower student voice and tell the unvarnished truth as it is posited in the 1619 Project, and how we roll that out to our students and our teachers. And so we know that nationally, the legacy of slavery has been taught from a Eurocentric lens, and it also often romanticizes the atrocities of slavery and includes misinformation that really perpetuates stereotypes and also degrades or put our students in a deficit model of thinking about who they are presently and historically. And so including the 1619 Project as part of the emancipation curriculum really was our way of saying we are going to liberate the minds of students, all students, from misinformation and notions of Black inferiority, which is rampant in our school districts across the country, but was definitely at the time in Buffalo Public Schools very prevalent. And so we had decided we were going to teach from a strength-based education model that focuses in on critical analysis and honors the legacy of Black and Indigenous people of color. Next slide. Next slide, please. And so infusing that with our emancipation curriculum, we, again, freeing the minds of our young people from disinformation, and actually at the same time elevating the voices and human experiences of people of color. So our culturally responsive approach to the 1619 Project was really that we aligned the standards, the New York State standards, and we infused lessons and readings that were captured by the 1619 Project magazine into our core curriculum, the existing curriculum, which was, of course, a very Eurocentric curriculum. And by infusing it into the standards and the pacing plan for all schools, it became something that was not optional or separate, and teachers didn't feel like, oh, this is just something extra now, another layer or something I had to do. Initially, we had a lot of hard time with that, but as we begin to see how we could align the curriculum and the standards to the 1619 Project through the emancipation curriculum, we began to see success. And so the purpose was really, again, to inform our students, to give them the knowledge, not indoctrinate them with our own thoughts, but to give them true facts and history for the first time so that they can make their own decisions as democratic citizens, and to have a perspective that's not imposed on them from just one view, but multiple perspectives from the readings that we were including from the 1619 Project and other national authors. And so this was 1619 Project, and what we were already doing in Buffalo was very timely. And so this work began in 2019, 2020, and then we were so lucky to be in the inaugural cohort of the Pulitzer Center's grant, 1619 grant program, because that only edified the work we were already doing. Next slide, please. And so the journey really began with how we began to talk about dismantling disproportionality in our district. In our district, we had clear evidences and had been cited by the state for overrepresentation of males of color in suspension enrollment as well as in special education. So there was that opportunity with that citation to get this work done without we got a lot of pushback, but it wasn't as harsh because we could always go back to the data. And then we began to do a systemic training of all of our teachers and administrators. And I know we were very lucky. We had Nicole Hannah-Jones come twice to Buffalo for training with over 500 teachers on one occasion and another 500 on another occasion. But having that training, not just with her, but with other leaders in the field, we were able to empower the teachers with resources, tools, and a philosophy and a mental model about how we educate all children, but particularly children of color. And we were helped with a literary text rollout. We were one of the first districts in the country to mandate 1619. So the Pulitzer Center was very graceful in giving us over 6,000 magazines that we put into the hands of every 11th and 12th grader to start. And then I began to, since I was the direct supervisor of all content directors, English, math, social studies, science, music, art, so on, we had multi-departmental meetings on a weekly basis to talk about how do we infuse and align the 1619 project into our curriculum that we would then train our teachers on and have it as required teaching. Again, the Pulitzer Center grant came at the same time, and we were able to get some teacher leaders who were really passionate about the work to help us develop more resources and to also advocate, have a voice around advocacy with teachers and other curriculum leaders that really helped us to get this work done. But critical to success is access. And so we began to develop platforms and materials and resources that teachers, by the click of a button, you can go to the Buffalo Public Schools website and click Emancipation Curriculum, and you can see all of the curriculum. And that did not exist before the Pulitzer Center, before we got on board with them and began to really think about that. And then finally, yeah, and so we have digitized copies of it for everyone. And then next slide. And then finally, some of the work that really is powerful and impactful, because again, we didn't want teachers to feel like you have to teach something up and above. So what we did was we looked at the curriculum, and we did an entire curriculum overhaul, basically an infusion. So we looked at our standards. So where we were teaching things like A Raisin in the Sun, we could simply and easily infuse the article by Kevin Cruz on traffic, which basically spoke to redlining, and The Raisin in the Sun was also redlining as well. And so when you think about the standard for 11th grade for determining two or more central ideas of a text and analyzing their development, what we did was we said, okay, you have A Raisin in the Sun already. I'm going to slide in traffic. And now we have two literary pieces that align to the New York State standards. So it was a tough work, but it was really important that we did that so that teachers could see how it easily fit in and how these ideas work together. But there was a lot of training for our curriculum leads and our teachers, the curriculum leads who were actually creating the lessons and aligning the standards. And then what we did was across the curriculum, English, language arts, and social studies, we infused lessons, including 1619 project, across all those grade levels. And then we mandated it as a component of the Emancipation Curriculum Project. And I was promoted to superintendent, and our work is just beginning in Southampton. So we'll get here, but this was really a 5-year endeavor to get where Buffalo is now. Thank you.
Wow, that's just powerful. Again, my name is Shamia Truitt, and I am part of the Bull Cities cohort of 2023. And our lessons were designed to enhance critical thinking skills, foster a sense of belongingness, promote cultural relevance, and enlighten our scholars about resilience and the thought-provoking historical narrative of African-American people through the lens of Durham's Black Wall Street and its place in history. We started out with elementary school, where they had the groundwork, where they were learning about entrepreneurship, as well as what happened, born to order, like what happened exactly when, the people came over, slaves came over, and what that took place. Then we had the middle grades that was analyzing Durham's Black Wall Street and how important it was to Durham. And then in high school, they had the curriculum based on comparing and contrasting Durham's Black Wall Street to Tulsa, Oklahoma's Black Wall Street, and comparing and contrasting the differences, what happened. It all started because of our wonderful 1619 project book that we love immensely, right? We basically read it inside and out and knew everything about it. And basically one of the quotes that came up that really resonated loud and clear to us was, but would it be historically inaccurate to reduce the contributions of Black people to the vast material wealth created by our bondage? Black Americans have also been and continue to be foundational to the idea of American freedom. That resonated loud and clear, especially to me, because it's really important to show our students, to tell our students in the narratives that they come from great stock and they are very resilient. So we came up with the question, why Durham's Black Wall Street? Next slide. Next slide, please. The first thing that we definitely did was analyze our standards. We can't do anything unless the standards are applicable to the lessons. And this is an interdisciplinary lesson with language arts. It's literacy-based with social studies. I'm a social studies teacher certified in high school social studies as well as language arts. So we know the importance of driving this curriculum in an interdisciplinary manner. So the first thing we do is we set the stage, right? You have the wonderful promise, and the students looked at page 10 and they came up with analyzing that information from the text, went back to the text. They did a 3-2-1 activity where they had to come up with 3 interesting facts that they gathered from the text. 2 facts that basically reiterated the resilience of these people and how they contributed to the American tapestry. And then they had to generate a question to ask their classmates, right? And following that, they had to basically analyze our illustrious Hannah Jones quote, right? And analyze that and come up with a conclusion like, what did that quote actually mean? The next lesson after that was they had to really dive deep into learning about Stagville and the plantation, right? The historic Stagville plantation and what happened after the Emancipation Proclamation. First of all, some people decided, yes, we're going to stay and we're going to be sharecroppers on this land. But the others said, we're going to forge our own way and we're going to make a difference. Next slide. Please, next slide. And so they answer these questions, right? Why do you think the settlers chose to build a community segregated from the larger white community? And how did this decision affect their success? Once they finished analyzing the text and analyzing what they did, then they had to start on their research, their quest, because those founding fathers and mothers did a great, great service to Durham, and they were very resilient as they were doing it. So they had their research that they had to conduct, and they could either present it in a research poster or a newspaper article, and they had to write a commentary about it in an ACES format, right? Citing their evidence and making sure they could prove why they felt this way, right? And they were sharing with the group. Next slide. This was very, very impactful. And you'll see from the takeaways how impactful it was. Let's hear it. Press enter. It should. Anyway, the students were talking about the reason why they really loved the project. And I'm sorry, we're having technological difficulties. It's not, you can't hear it. Sorry about that. And that's basically resonated loud and clear with the students. And that's why they did a really great job on this. And this was done throughout the district. Thank you.
Well, I think if anyone in the audience is like I am, you're just amazed at the power of these lessons, and I loved hearing the stories about how not only are they being taught, but they're being infused district-wide. These are such a gift to teachers, students in your districts and nationally. I have a few questions, and I think we'll also have some questions from the participants here. Although, again, your presentations were so rich that I think for any of us thinking about teaching these, it's so helpful to not just read them, but to hear your rationale, student responses, to see images. So thank you for sharing those all with us in such a great capsule. I think there was actually one question earlier for Dr. Allen, and that is about the very important issue of infusing social studies and math. I think Ms. Maughan talked about connecting it with science. Dr. Allen, can you talk about the connection to math?
Absolutely. I love that question, and thank you so much for that question. So I thought that was a challenge for me because, again, I am first and foremost a math teacher. My minor was social studies, so that's why I try to infuse it. And what I do, due to, well, the district that I'm in, we're very constrained to teaching the curriculum you're assigned to teach. So how do you dive outside of those? Well, I became a partnerships with many initiatives in the state of Michigan, Civic Justice Center for All Students. That's one. Another one is MCCE, Michigan Civic Center for Education. I became involved in those, and they kind of guided me to the connection with mathematics, mathematical timelines. Many social studies curriculum is about dates, places, and persons and things. So I use that mathematically and dive right in sideways. I also have toured the country, Philadelphia, Boston. This summer, we're going to Tuskegee, Alabama, to get remnants and learn more through the culture of the things, again, that is not in curriculum. And finally, I also, every month, have a Project Friday in my mathematics class. So since math is part of STEM, I, again, infuse that and have them research the unknowns. That was my final slide that I had too many, so I was not able to show some of the student work. But I'm getting people, talking about Google creators and the Wi-Fi creators and all. I'm learning through my students, and I tell them, trick me, influence me, wow me. So they really work hard to try to find information on persons that, again, that are not in the textbooks. And I tell them, try to find somebody that's living now. So they really, we make a PowerPoint presentation to the school at the end of the school years. It's about 100 slides in it. And I put the music and the doo-wops in the back. And it is very, very math connected. The principals, I've been at 3 schools. I'm like a gypsy. I love traveling from school to school to teach. So with that said, it's been very acceptable and very enriching for our students. So definitely, any way you can sneak it in, that's what I say. Yes, I do stick to the curriculum with fidelity, but I do put that social studies in it too. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I see one in the chat that was a question I had, so we'll jump to that one. And that is, are you currently experiencing, or how will you respond to pushback against, accusing you of this is violating an anti-CRT law, or you're not respecting the founding fathers? Anyone like to comment on either how you've experienced that so far or what your preparation is?
I can go ahead. Luckily, in the district, I'm in an urban school district in northern New Jersey, and my district has always been aware of who our student population is. And so we know how important it is for us to really address the needs of our community. I served as the 2022 New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, and I had the opportunity to travel our state. And truthfully, in New Jersey, as you move further south in New Jersey, it's not the same in every school community. And I know for a fact that there are districts in our state that would be resistant to what our unit introduces. But I say, no matter what district you're in, one of the ways to really meet that head on is through transparency. Have everything out there, invite parents to be able to take a look at the curriculum, have conversations, and don't get bogged down in accusations of CRT.
Right. And I think Ms. Truitt.
Yes, and I would like to add, like, we presented to the North Carolina State for social studies and math curriculum. And basically, if you're driving your curriculum through the standards, there's no pushback as long as you are aligning it to the standards and making sure that everyone knows that. So in Durham, we didn't really get a pushback, but you can imagine in other small rural areas, there might be pushback, but it was well received throughout North Carolina. And the reason why is because it was definitely purposefully aligned to the standards.
Now you might start getting pushback on the standards. But I also think it's important, and it's so helpful that this seminar is happening today, because you're creating a norm that these lessons are being taught, which helps the people in communities to argue, but look, it's being taught in these other places. I also am glad that Ms. Maughan mentioned the resistance in New Jersey, because a lot of times people assume it's only in the southern states, but we know that the anti-CRT laws and then the commensurate sort of chilling effect is happening nationally. So another question I had is about, which shifts to your own learning. As we know, writing a lesson like this, just as they are, you probably had to learn 3 times as what's in each lesson in order to write them, to distill what needed to be taught. Would anybody like just to talk about your own learning process? How did you become scholars of your topic? Since it's not what we learned in school ourselves, I'm assuming.
I can take that one if you don't mind. I can start with that one. This has definitely been a journey for me and has been very empowering. And so the 1619 Project magazine itself, some of the things that I read in there, you're absolutely correct. I had no idea of our history as Black people, and I still have a lot to learn. But reading the articles in the magazine, oh my goodness, mass incarceration and how it's tied to the school to prison pipeline, and looking at like traffic, and being from Buffalo where redlining and developing highways through a Black community is something I was experiencing in real life. And then I turn and, I'm reading this for the first time and making the connection. It was just a light bulb went on for me. But what was really impactful is that because they were niched in such a tight little magazine, they were quick reads. They were really quick reads, and it didn't take, you're not reading a thick book, but just a snapshot that'll make you go run and do more research. And so, like with Mims, and all he did for Black women in healthcare, as Mrs. Maughan mentioned, that whole story I didn't know. But then I wind up in Alabama one day and I see a big statue of him, and people were trying to tear it down. So it kind of it was like life in reality. Art was coming to life for me in real time, and my eyes have been opened. And that's why I'm so passionate about this now, because I know our kids don't know who they truly are and all we have overcome, and how resilient we are, and how beautifully brilliant we are to survive such atrocities. So it's really important for me to make sure that they know they're empowered in that way. And so, yeah, I did have to do a lot of research, but I wanted to. These articles fed me in a way that made me want to go run off and do more. And I haven't stopped ever since. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to quickly respond to that question before we move to the next one?
I did. So I'm just going to piggyback on Dr. Morrell. Please understand that I agree with everything you said. This work was extra work, but it made me want to do more and more and more, and scaffold more and more and more. And all the resources that was provided to even start the work, as a group, as a cohort, we puzzle piece things together, and again, made sure that we tied into those standards. And it was just very, and as you stated also, Dr. Morrell, I have not stopped working. I right now am working in a cohort with the state of Michigan with senators and representatives to write legislation legislature to permanently put things in our curriculum and Common Core standards for Michigan.
Great, thank you. And I think also as driven as we all are to learn this history, I think students are too, and students deserve to have this history and not the same sort of dominant narrative that gets taught every year that is disempowering and also really. So I think thank you again for translating that history into lessons. There's a question here which I'm going to share and then add to. One question was about how do you address SEL issues for students, and I would add to that, and it's related, considering that a lot of this history is hard history, is traumatic history, is how do you also balance being truthful about that and also leave students not with any sense of hope, but the confidence that they can make a difference. So if you could, anyone like to address that?
I can address that. I'm a firm believer in what Goldie Muhammad teaches about cultivating joy, cultivating genius. And with that, I always feel that it's very important to help my students understand that we research what the problems have been in history, but we also look at agency. We look at the power of all people, the enslaved throughout our history. We cannot deny that. And we look at their power. We look at their ability. In our project, they had within their grasp the ability to put forward policy change. And so by giving that power, I think we take away the, negative, always traumatic experiences. But we do have to enter into these units with an understanding and help to gauge what the trauma may be for those that are in the classroom with us. We have to really do some prep time with our students to help them understand that and to give them grace that if they need to remove themselves from a situation that they feel is just a little bit too emotionally heavy for them, then we have to be willing to look at alternative ways of addressing what we need to address.
Yes, thank you. And I did appreciate how your lesson, students don't just learn about agency, they learn how to do it, they exercise it. It's really important.
Practice it.
Anybody else like to comment on that? There was also a question about addressing through any of your lessons. I don't know if anyone would like to address that.
I would like to, oh, you're gonna go on, Ms. Truitt-Martin?
It's okay, you can go on.
Okay, well, I would just like to follow up with what Ms. Maughan said. It's very important to center joy, and I look a lot at Dr. Goldie Muhammad's work too, and have had her in Buffalo on a few occasions. But I think that one of the things that we have to know and understand is that it's very disempowering as well when we hide the truth from our young people. So how do we center joy? How do we ensure that our young people can see the genius and the brilliance and an elevation of these narrations? And so one of the things that we've added since all of this have started and what they've added in the Buffalo Public Schools and what I've begun to implement here in Long Island is Circle Up, right? So those social emotional learning circles where we create a sense of trust and openness, and to start your classes that way, to do that as a kind of a launch of any lesson that you're going to go into, but then doing those check-ins with students each and every day around the different various topics that we're going to be engaging in. But I know for a fact that in the Buffalo Public Schools district, there were students who by the time we took hold of this and had begun to implement this, they were really disconnected and displaced from who they were, because the only thing that we ever taught them was that, Black people were slaves, they didn't have much to offer, and then you had Dr. King and Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks in the story. That was what they had. And so even though sometimes the truth can be a look could hurt. The truth can hurt. It does hurt. When I still read some of these stories, like the mass auction they had, oh, couldn't believe it. They had there in the one story. I can't remember now. It turned my stomach, but I had to be able to unpack that. And I think we unpack that for myself so I could be able to unpack it for teachers so teachers could unpack it for children. So we have to do our own self-work too before we go into these kinds of conversations. We have to be able to read these articles and stories and narrations and then do the self-work we need to do around it and let people know, hey, you may feel a little bit some way around this, but look at the genius of being able to come up from sharecroppers after having nothing after slavery, but now look, we own property, and look at the genius of this and that and the science and the math, and just really honing in on that. But I think those circles are really critical, especially post-pandemic. Thank you.
And if we have time, I would just like to add, making sure that, the students really realize within the struggle, there were so many successes, right? And that you bring to light those successes. That's what our whole project was about. Our whole initiative was about making sure that the students knew the resiliency and the joy from their resiliency. Like, this just didn't happen through happenstance, that this happened because of the due diligence and their strong conviction and how they did have joy. And always talking about that, like really emphasizing the architects during that time that built beautiful, buildings, the math, the reason why we're so strong, and going back to that, pulling those things out and making sure the students really, really understand it and really see it. I think it's so important.
And I just wanted to quickly add, from the elementary and middle school level, having Socratic discussions like Nat Turner, villain or hero. And that was phenomenal. I was able to do one of those debates or discussions, because it wasn't a debate, in front of the superintendent, who was considering removing that chapter from the instructional curriculum. And it's still in.
Oh, good. And that's going to be another lesson. Hopefully you can write up and share. That's such an important one. And I'll just say, as probably the one white person, at least on this panel here, usually the anti-CRT folks say that this is all, we don't want to have white children feeling guilty, right? And we know their real concern is that when white children learn this history, they are also enraged because they realize that this is a divide and conquer history. And that usually what white children feel is a sense of anger, righteous anger, as they should, empathy and solidarity. And that's the real threat. And so your lessons are powerful for the very students who've been denied that history, who it is their history, but really for this whole country. It's a democratic process, and just the whole history of resistance, because that's the other thing we've been taught, that it wasn't just Rosa Parks who desegregated the buses, it was Claudette Colvin. Well, yes, but actually, going back to the 19th century, people have been protesting every day. And so I think your curriculum shows that history of resistance is a daily, creative, brilliant history. And these are brilliant lessons, which we know took an immense amount of time and scholarship and trial and error and revisions to prepare. And so I think on the behalf of all the attendees, myself, everyone who will use these, just boundless gratitude for your work, and your work not only developing the lessons, but making sure they're going to get out and reach a large audience, which I think is the charge of all of us attending, is to make sure we share those links from the Pulitzer Center, so that they get, especially in the face of all these attacks, that we're going to say, instead of just doing less, we're going to do more, and your lessons will help do that. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully the Pulitzer Center will host more sessions and spread the word. And so I'm going to pass it back to our hosts. I think Kendra is going to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you to all of our panelists. I hope that each of you here today enjoyed this very rich and generative discussion and that you're leaving feeling empowered and inspired to continue to do this work of teaching truth in your classrooms. And I invite you to join us again. We'll be back for our third webinar, Making 1619 Accessible, on Saturday, November 16th at 3 p.m. So hope to see you there. Thank you all for joining us.